Hi, I'm Daryl Owens, the Director of Communication here at Beacon College, and today we are blessed with the presence of today's keynote speaker. He is a successful businessman, a tireless philanthropist, and a member of the LD tribe. He is president of Crossman Company, one of the Southeast's largest retail leasing, management, and investment sales firms, and a proud graduate of Florida State University. In order to foster racial reconciliation, he conceived of a plan to use real estate education to help minorities gain fiscal parity through greater participation in the wealth-building real estate industry. To that end, he endowed real estate scholarships at Florida A&M University and Bethune-Cookman College, both historically black higher education institutions, and inspired the formation of real estate clubs at both campuses. He is a United Negro College Fund Champion of Education and was awarded the Underground Railroad Award from the U.S. House of Representatives. Senator Marco Rubio nominated him to the Regional Service Academy Nomination Board, while Governor Rick Scott appointed him to Valencia College's Board of Trustees. Ladies and gentlemen, and fellow alumni, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the dais real estate titan, social crusader, and proud dyslexic, John Crossman.
That was like super nice introduction, by the way. And you should know that Daryl, one of his biggest fans is my mom. I told my mom I was going to speech, and all she wanted to hear about was Daryl. So that's a big thing. Hey, so before I get started, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with you. This first slide I have up is all these different ways that if you want, you can connect with me. And I've got a stack of my business cards here at my table. I can give those out. I can leave them behind. The reason why I want you to know that is that one of the things I really try to do a good job at is for the rest of my life providing free resources to college students. Now, some of those resources are information about how to get into real estate, but others are other subjects, and I just want you to know that if there's any way it's useful to you, have at it, you have access to it. And so a couple examples would be like, I use LinkedIn a lot. That's a lot of professional way to connect with people. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that's great. If you want to look how my LinkedIn profile is and it helps you, that's awesome. If you go to my website, I have a thing called a guide to commercial real estate, people interested in a real estate career. But if you go into it, there's some guide in there about how to just do networking or how to do a job interview. So it's just general information. And then I also have a YouTube channel. And on my YouTube channel, I've got all kinds of information about speeches and lectures I've done, some about leadership. A lot of times I get asked to do a speech I titled it's the top 5 ways to get fired, the top 5 ways to keep from being fired. So we're not going to talk about that today, but I want you to know that you have access to it. If that's helpful to you, I want you to know you can get it, okay? All right, so with that, I just want to go ahead and start talking a little bit about myself and the subject. And, when I was thinking about this, something really jumped out to me. And I want to kind of tell you what my big picture message is, and then I want to kind of break it down as I go through this talk. And at the end, I'll have time for Q&A, and believe me, you can ask me anything you want. But this is the main thing I want you to hear, is that I believe as we go through our life, and we look back on it, we have wounds. We have things in our life that we suffered with. It's really important that we acknowledge those wounds, we process those wounds, and then what we do if we really can get healthy with them is that we learn that those can be used as tools to help us be healthy adults and professionals. And then the best way we can be successful is then learning how to take those tools and then use them to help others process what they're dealing with. So that's sort of my big picture thing. But with that, I want to start out with this. I'm going to skip this, come back. But I want to talk to you about the FSU Hall of Fame. So in 2013, I had, at that moment, which was probably the most significant thing happen in my professional career, and that was as a graduate of Florida State University, and I graduated in 1993. In 2013, exactly 20 years after I graduated, I was inducted through the College of Business Hall of Fame. Now, as you might imagine, that's a big deal. I'm still to this day, I'm the youngest person ever in the Hall of Fame. I'm always hoping they nominate old people in the future, so I can always maintain that youngest person ever in the Hall of Fame. And so it's unique that being the youngest guy in there, and Other people in the Hall of Fame are like the past president of Disney World is in the Hall of Fame. The current president of FSU just got inducted to the Hall of Fame. And Jim Seneff from CNL, if you know Jim Seneff, he's in the Hall of Fame. And there's actually my face, this is weird, but they have a bust of my face on a building at FSU. So you can go, they say if you touch my forehead, you'll get an A on a test. I don't know if that's true, but they say that, right? Maybe I say that, I don't know. So when this happened to me, people might think, gosh, there's like just this great, huge moment in your career, in your professional life, this acknowledgement of all the hard work and success you have. And that's true, and I felt that. But in that moment, I also had a secret shame. What people didn't know about me was, people thought, hey, John, you're a Hall of Fame, you're a smart guy. But I never ever told anybody this. When I graduated from FSU, my GPA was 2.9, okay? And that is pretty unimpressive when you think about it. For a lot of people who are in academic world, they don't think that's a big deal. Certainly, I would think that people nominating me for the Hall of Fame, if they had a 2.9, they probably would not have put me in. Maybe they would, I don't know. But here's the other side of it. Sometimes people will say, well, I graduated college, I had a 2.9 GPA, but I never went to class, I partied all the time, and I just barely showed up and I passed. That was not true for me. In college, I never went to parties. I never skipped class. I got every single tutor I could possibly get. Every single chance I went to study hall, I went to study hall. I worked as hard as I possibly know how to work, and I earned a 2.9, and that's the best I could have possibly gotten, okay? But I was ashamed of that, and because of that shame, I was embarrassed, and I think that traditional academia has a certain way they view success, and maybe people's ability to have a photographic memory, hear a lecture, read a book, memorize it, and say it right back. I don't have that ability. So I never told anybody that, never talked about it. Well, a few months later, I started having this health issue, and so I went and saw my doctor. I had to see my doctor a lot during that next year. And in one of the many meetings he and I had just about my health issues, we're talking, my doctor said to me, John, I think you might have dyslexia. And I was kind of stunned. At the time, I was 42. I was like, wow, really? And he said, yeah. And so I said, well, what should I do about it? He goes, you're 42, write it out. He just said, just keep on going. But I went and actually took some testing, and I like to say it this way, I tested super duper dyslexic, as I like to put it. And it was funny because after sort of getting over the shock of that, I actually felt a tremendous sense of relief. It was just so helpful to know, hey, wait a minute, I'm not stupid. And I will tell you that for all those years before I knew that I actually had dyslexia, if you kind of like poked into me and sort of asked me about, what was going on inside of me, I would tell you that, man, I felt stupid. I felt ashamed, that I was really, suffering inside of me, and it didn't really, know exactly what was going on. And Daryl in his introduction, he mentioned the story of how I got appointed by Senator Rubio to the U.S. Military Academy Appointment Committee. And what's interesting about that is that what you do in that job is, I was on this committee with a former U.S. Navy captain and a former Navy fighter pilot, former enlisted Navy person, another person, and myself. And of course, I'm not a former military person, but I work a lot with college students, and so I think that's why they wanted me to have that in that group. And so what you do is you interview all these students and you rank them recommendations to go into the U.S. Naval Academy. So it's like a big deal. And when I was interviewing these students, one of the things they went through training, they said it's important that you find students who have a passion for physics. Do you have a passion for physics? I have no interest in physics. That's like my nightmare scenario is doing physics. And so when I would interview these students, every single time, and it's 5 years in a row, I'd ask these students, what is your favorite subject? If you could do any subject you want, what would it be? 100% of the times they'd say physics. And then I'd ask them, I'd say, why physics? And they'd say, because I like to understand how things work. And I get that, because if you're in a submarine and something bad happens, you have to have people have that kind of brain, right? Or if you're in a fighter jet, and the engine goes out, you have to know what to do. So I appreciate what it takes to be a traditional academic person. But I'm telling you, I couldn't pass one lecture in physics. I don't think I could spell physics right now. I really don't think I could, right? So I respect academia, but for me, it was a constant suffering. When I think back to 10-year-old John Crossman being in a classroom, I can tell you I can still feel it when I think about having the pit of my stomach being so nervous in school and terrified if the teacher was going to ask me a question. If I took a class tomorrow on a subject I didn't know, I would be nervous. And if I would think about a teacher asking me a question on a subject I don't know, I would get extremely nauseous. Right now, at my age now, even you might say, well, you had a lot of success. Doesn't matter. I still get intimidated about that. And then when I think about it, sometimes in life, in my life, when I've expressed to people that I'm suffering, people say some really dumb, not helpful advice. Like sometimes even like, this is sort of Christianese, people say this in church sometimes, they'll say, well, God won't give you more than you can handle, right? And I'm like, well, first, that's not in the Bible, but also, that's not really helpful, because when you're suffering, it doesn't feel that way, right? Or then another thing sometimes men say, coaches will say is, well, you just need to man up. Just man up. I was visiting a church one Sunday, and it was Father's Day, and the sermon was all about men, fathers need to step it up. And I was thinking, I really don't feel like I need to step it up. What I really need is a hug. Like I'm really trying hard to be a dad here, I need kind of a little bit of a break, So a lot of these things weren't really helpful. Now, I'll tell you that several years ago, I went through a little bout with depression. And so when I was looking and dealing with depression, I kind of started learning a process of how to deal with some of the things in my life that I had suffered with. So when I was going through this whole process, I relived an experience I had. In 2004, I've joked with my wife that 2004 was our trip to hell. And the reason why I say it that way is that in July 4th of 2004, I injured my back so severely I had to be strapped to a board and carried out of a hotel room by ambulance people. And if you touched me, if I moved any way because of the damage to my back, I would scream uncontrollably. And I feel like I have a pretty high tolerance for pain, but if you touched me, it was uncontrollable pain, okay? So as I started going through recovery from that, my dad was terminally ill, went off dialysis, chose to come home and passed away. So back, my dad passed away. The hurricane season, that was bad hurricane season we had, our house got severely damaged, so badly damaged we had to move out of it for 6 months. And then my second daughter, Ava, was born, and when she was about 2 or 3 weeks old, they had what you called an acute life-threatening event, which they don't know exactly what happened, but we thought she may die from it. By the way, she's right there. She's fine. Don't worry about her. She's fine. She's good. So wave to crowd, Ava. Wave to crowd. She's good. But if you can imagine, in 2004 into 2005, I lost my body, I lost my dad, I lost my house, and I almost lost my youngest daughter. Okay? And what I found is that the people around me had no idea how to help me. They had no idea how to give me advice or counsel. And yet these things that were happening to me were obviously, the physical part was one thing, but the emotional part was very, very significant. So one of the things that I learned how to do was to figure out how do we process pain. So my first point in saying to you is, like, when I think about myself and I think about my life and I think about my dyslexia, the first thing I think about is suffering, the wounds, the shame, the embarrassment, the guilt, humiliation that I had from suffering from dyslexia and the academic world that I came from, okay? So the first thing I needed to do was to figure out, how do I process that pain? If I was leaving here today and I walked across the street, I got hit by a car and I broke my arm, right? What would you guys do? Well, you would call 911 and you would help me get to a doctor, and I would get the arm fixed, and I would go and get healed and processed. See a doctor a bunch of times, go through physical therapy, probably still have some injuries with that arm my whole life, but that's the process. So what do we do when we have an emotional wound, right? Well, when we have an emotional wound, we need to do the same thing. We need to get through a process of dealing with the healing with it. Let me say it another way, is that what if some of you were great athletes and you were thinking about getting drafted into the NFL? You're going to play professional football. Do you know that if you play one full season of professional football, there's a 100% chance you're going to get injured? Think about that. 100% chance. Now, you might miss one play and one practice, you might miss a game, you might miss half the season or whatever, but you will get injured. So if you're thinking about getting drafted into the NFL and you found out that the NFL team that's thinking about drafting you had no doctors on staff. Would you play for that team? No way. Well, let me tell you this. In life, there is a 100% chance we are all going to get emotionally wounded. 100% chance. So in life, we must have some emotional doctors around us to help us deal with those things. Does that make sense? So in my first step of me dealing with dyslexia is really unpacking that and understanding that. So one of them was going and seeing a counselor. And so I recommend this. You don't see a counselor your whole life, but to me, at different points in my time, seeing a professional counselor who was able to help me process and deal with things has been very helpful. You know, if you have the cure for an untreated wound is very painful. It's actually more painful than a wound that just happened, right? So if I cut myself and I go see a doctor right away and they get it all fixed up, it heals quickly. But if I don't heal it right, if I don't do it, then they got to come in and clean out an old wound. Oh, it's painful. So when we think about things from our past, if we're going to go through and deal with this past painful experience from our childhood, it's painful. It's worth it, but it's painful. And some people, the wounds from their childhood are so bad, they choose not to deal with it, and then it deals with them, right? So when we deal with people who have addiction problems or suicide or things like that, a lot of times that's the path where they went to. So I don't want that to happen to you. So I would tell you, like, seek out counseling. I've done that, and it's been very, very helpful to me. A second example of healthy things we can do to deal with some of the things in our past would be journaling. This probably won't surprise you. I'm not a good writer. It's hard for me to write. But you know what I do? I don't write like a novel. I write little bullet points, and it helps me. One thing I did recently is I wrote a timeline of my life. And so when I wrote the timeline of different places I lived and wrote them out, then I kind of wrote what feelings I had when I was in those places. And then I went back and I saw consistencies. And when I look at the consistencies of feelings through my childhood and my adult life, it's shaped me. And I could really draw a line to my successes and failures of my life now based on those consistencies. So just that timeline of journaling. Feelings, you know, I've become a big believer in feelings. When I first started going to counseling, when I went back in '04, when I went through those rough times, the counselor would look at me and say, "John, how are you doing?" And my answer was always, "Good, I'm good." Because I would think to myself, well, I live in America, and you know, it's a good time to be alive, and I should feel good. Or if I was feeling bad, I might say stressed. Well, I'm stressed. Well, my counselor really busted my chops about that, because good's not a real word, okay? And stressed is not those aren't real words. And so my counselor really worked hard on me as far as like sharing what are these feelings? And sometimes what I was feeling was sad, and that's okay. If you saw the movie Inside Out, there's a great part of that movie about sitting in sadness and then processing that. Or instead of saying stressed, well, what does that really mean? Does that mean I'm overwhelmed? Does that mean I'm tired? What does that word mean? Sometimes when we're at dinner, my wife and our two daughters will just ask to go around the table and just talk about what are you feeling. And so again, being a man and shaped in the generation I was shaped in, we didn't do feelings. But feelings will do you if you don't deal with them, okay? So I just say the process of understanding what we feel is good. And then the last couple things I'd say is friends. I meet with a group of guys every Friday morning, and a lot of times we talk about what's going on in our lives, what we're feeling, and we have one guy kind of facilitate the group. And I have been there many a Friday morning where I've seen another man cry. And the first time I saw another adult man cry, I thought, what a loser, or what a wimp, or what, in my mind. But as I've gotten older, I've realized, man, that's bravery, that's courage, that's good. You guys know who Jim Brown is? Jim Brown was one of the greatest football players of all time, also one of the greatest lacrosse players of all time. Phenomenal athlete, big, muscular guy. And he used to say, men don't cry. They don't cry at all. That does not happen. He was in an interview one time with the ESPN, and they said to him, you used to believe that, and then you changed. And Jim Brown said, yes, that's true. I used to believe men don't cry, but then my friend died, and Jim Brown started bawling. He started crying so hard they had to stop the interview. And Jim Brown talked about his friend from high school and college and pro football passed away. And so Jim Brown is about as tough, as strong a man you could possibly imagine, has said, crying is good. It's part of that. And of course, when we really share our sadness with people, that's what creates intimacy and we're closer. And then the final thing I'd say is I'd say it like this, moderate exercise. like just exercising, not too strong. I tend to be a competitive person, so sometimes I exercise too much. I've had to learn to, what I do now is I get my steps in, I more walk. And a lot of times my daughters, we take walks a lot of nights. I get them to work, and either all three of us or one of us will walk to CVS, and we'll get something healthy like a Reese's bar or something, or so whatever we do. That's what I get. They get something healthy. And we walk back. But in that walking, I'm getting my exercise in, but we're also able to talk about our day and that process, okay? So if I could stop right there, but because I think that's so important when we talk about our past and talk about the challenges I've had or you have, there's meaning to it and there's purpose, but we've got to understand those feelings levels first. Is that helpful? Okay, let me go to my next point. The next thing I want to talk about is who is John Crossman? Now, the reason why I say that to you is I want to flash forward to, wait, can I tell you something real quick? I forgot to. I'm going to tell you one more thing real quick, and that is this. When I was talking back about dyslexia, I do want to say to you that through all the suffering I had for that, from all the shame I had from that, and the pain I had from that, it did teach me something that I didn't really get my brain around until the last couple of years, and that it really taught me humility. I think that if I hadn't had dyslexia, I think my arrogance may have killed me, honestly. I think that having a learning disability, the fact that I had to work harder than everybody else, the fact I had to come to grips with, I'm never going to go to grad school, I'm not going to be a lawyer, I'm not going to be a doctor, those things I'm not eligible for, and accepting that was hard, but it taught me I have limitations and that's okay. I can't do everything I need to do. The other thing I want to say is that it taught me hard work. As in college, I had to work harder than everybody else. But you know what? When I got into my job, it made me a lot better employee, much better employee. You know why? I showed up first. I stayed late. So when I got into a work environment and some of the work things were kind of easy for me, just because it better matched my skill set, it was more of a level playing field, I beat the people who did have graduate degrees. I beat the people who were 4.0s because I just showed up more often. So my dyslexia helped me with that. I was thinking about this morning. I don't know if you guys remember the TV show Seinfeld. And there was an episode of Seinfeld where Kramer couldn't figure out how to take a shower in less than an hour and a half. And so he went to a public, YMCA, was watching other men shower to study them to see what are they doing to take showers faster. And at the end of the episode, he just decided to take long showers and do his cooking in the shower. So for me, I've had some of that in my life where things I felt like are easy for other people are harder for me. But then the byproduct of that is I've gotten really good at things that are hard for other people to do. So I wanted to make this statement. I'm grateful for my dyslexia. I'm grateful for it. And I really need you to understand this, is that the dyslexia caused me wounds, and that's real. Not something to jump over, process it. And I'm grateful for it because it's helped me make me stronger. Does that make sense? It's both things are true. There's a paradox. Both things are true. And I will also add that when I think about really healing, the key to healing in my future has been giving back and helping other people through their process. All right, now I want to talk about this. So who is John Crossman? So years ago, I heard this story. I was at this really important real estate conference, and my company had been purchased by a larger company, and they had this big event, and my seat was put right next to the president of this new company. And so the president of the company walked up to this woman who was in charge of the seating. He said, "Who do you have me sitting next to?" And she said, "I have you sitting next to John Crossman." To which he said, "Who is John Crossman?" He might have said, "Who the hell is John Crossman?" You're like, "Who is John Crossman?" But that statement of who is John Crossman has been a real hallmark part of my life. And I'll tell you why. In my childhood, we moved 8 times. From 9th through 12th grade, I went to 3 different schools. Now, if you think about what that can create, there's a lot of things that can come out of that. One is a lack of diagnosis of dyslexia, right? Because I moved around so much, I think maybe the teachers never saw the pattern, they didn't see it, so there's that. There's a lack of friends. When you change schools a lot, there's just a change of friends and environment. There were chunks of my childhood that were spent in dangerous environments. President Carter said, "You live in a safe neighborhood if you can walk around your block in the middle of the afternoon and not feel physically threatened." I did not have that for 5 or 6 years of my childhood. If I tried to walk around the block in the middle of the day, I would be physically threatened. I remember looking out the window of my house and watching domestic violence, watching child abuse. So when you can't go outside and play, what does that do to a person, right? And then as I had these different child experiences, these different places we moved, there were different cultures I was around. There were parts of my childhood where I was around really blue-collar environments. And some of my childhood I was around white-collar environments. Some of my childhood I was around a lot of former military people. And some of my childhood I was around a heavy Hispanic, Latino population. But by the way, some of it was Cuban, some was Puerto Rican, and you better know the difference, okay? Don't confuse those, you know. Some of it was Jewish, some of it was African American, some of it were retirees. But when you're around these different ethnic groups and you're a kid, you're 12 years old, and you don't quite understand the dynamics, what that really creates is loneliness. I had a very deep sense of loneliness throughout a big, huge part of my childhood. Loneliness can then create apathy. My nickname by my family when I was about 13 was couch potato. All right? I would get home from school at 3 o'clock, I would flop on the couch and pretty much not move until it was time to go to bed. I did that for I don't know how many years in a row. And when I think back on that, I got kind of teased about it, but what was really going on there was I just had a very high sense of loneliness. Now, that's sad, and again, when I think back on like 10 or 11, 12-year-old John Crossman, I think, gosh, that's kind of sad to think about how I was lonely. But there were things that were good that came out of that. And let me give you some examples. One of them was courage. You know, when I learned to work through that loneliness, it made me more assertive. When I'm in environments, if I walk in a room and I don't know anybody, I feel very comfortable. It also made me more helpful to be around different groups, around people that were different from me. When I really got involved in my real estate career, I've done a lot of work in shopping centers. And when you do work with shopping centers, you tend to work with different ethnic groups. I leased a shopping center in Kissimmee for one of my clients. I leased to people from 9 different nationalities in the same shopping center. And you know what? I loved it. I love meeting people and asking their story. And whether they're from Serbia or El Salvador, or they're from Mongolia, or they're from Thailand, I love that. I love that. But it's part of my background. I love people being retirees that have a military background. Or I love meeting somebody. I had a friend of mine from high school that I was lecturing at the University of North Carolina, and he tagged me on Facebook. We got together, and I never really thought about the fact we were in South Florida. He was Jewish, and I asked him, I said, when you were growing up in South Florida, did you know many Holocaust survivors? And he said, oh yes. And we had this long, really cool conversation about Holocaust survivors and what that was like, and the people in his family that knew about that. It was really cool. So this level of networking, right? And so if you start talking to me about, John, what was key to being successful in real estate? The ability to network, very key. The ability to work hard, very key. So the dyslexia, the travel, the loneliness, as sad as those things were, they made me. And so I become grateful for it. And what I'm really trying to say is the loneliness helped me really understand intimacy. And the intimacy has really helped me be effective in business. Does that make sense? So I have this picture here. This photo, I've had the ability in my life, met different politicians, different people, but the reason why I picked this one, I like it, is that's obviously me and Governor Rick Scott, and this was at an event, we were there together, and he appointed me. But the guy on the right, that's Orange County Mayor Rich Karate. And so Rich Karate had been good friends for a long time, and he had done a lot of cool stuff together. The woman on the left, she and I were childhood friends 35 years ago. And I didn't know that until about a year ago when this picture was taken. Isn't that crazy? But my point being is that I wouldn't have the ability to have the courage, I think, to go up and meet a governor and talk to that person if I hadn't had that loneliness. If I hadn't had the diversity of my childhood, I wouldn't have the connections of these different people because I met them all through different ways. So I'm thankful for it because it's helped build me. Okay, last couple things we're going to go through. If you can't read it, then it's wrong. When I was in school, one of the most common things was to be in 7th grade, and you're sitting in your seat, and you have somebody sitting to your right, somebody to your left, and you would do a test, and then the teacher would say, all right, we're going to grade the papers, change papers with your neighbor, right? And then the teacher goes to the answers, and you go through it. Did you do that, like grade your neighbor's paper? Yeah. Okay. So every single time the person grading my paper would raise their hand, and they'd say, well, what if I can't read their handwriting? And the teacher would say, if you can't read it, then it's wrong. How many tests did I get marked wrong on when I was a child and the answer was actually right? I can remember having a science class in 7th grade, turning in an assignment, and the teacher gave me back and gave me a D on it. She wrote on the top, where's 1 through 6 off, 30 points, D. I went back to her, I said, it's number 1. Number 1, 2, 3. She saw the 1 and just thought it was a 7 and just automatic, didn't even read. I was thinking, as a kid, I was thinking, you idiot, if you thought it was a 7, didn't it confuse you when it said 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? I mean, like, why would you not know that? But there is a lot of part of teaching. You're shaking your head, you know what I'm talking about. The teachers that just, well, if I can't read, it's wrong. I was thinking back on this. I remember being in 5th grade and them giving me a first grader's writing book. How embarrassing was that? Humiliating was that? And the number of people that say, John, don't you know how to hold a pen? Don't you know how to hold a pencil? Can't you do that? No, I can't. I can't. And of course, they used to give grades for handwriting. And the best grade I ever got was a C, and they were probably being nice, right? But I think now, like, that seems kind of ridiculous. My daughter Claire, when she was in 2nd grade, had bad handwriting, like I did, and was struggling with it. Well, she went into occupational therapy, geared it up, and at the end of the year, the teacher wrote that Claire had the best handwriting she'd ever seen, right? That's awesome. But we live in a different world now that's able to better identify those things. Back then, if you don't have really beautiful, nice penmanship, there's something wrong with you. But that's not really how it should work. Now, I'll tell you that I think that what that created in me was this sense of wanting to try to be successful. And I think that it was helpful to me to kind of like push into that. But there was one moment of all this that really, really helped shape me. I think that the handwriting thing probably created some anger in me. It probably created some fear in me, depression, maybe pride, I don't know. But my junior year of high school, I took a speech class. And I was just intrigued by that. Now, what's funny to me is if you gave me a book, if we all had a book to read, and then we had to take a test on it tomorrow, I promise you I'd get the lowest grade. It's very hard for me to read a book and take a test. But if I hear a lecture, I can remember that lecture in my head, and I can then do it well. But I have a hard time spelling words. We were talking, the girls and I their mom's out of town for the weekend, by the way, so we've been partying all weekend, me and my daughters. But we were watching Hunger Games last night, and so we got pizza watching Hunger Games. So we're talking about it in the car. I can't remember the characters' names. Like, it's really hard for me to remember. I can remember the plot, but the characters' names I can't get. So when I had this interest in taking a speech class, this was interesting because speech, public speaking, it kind of made sense to me. I felt like I got this. It's storytelling. This feels more like who I am. So when I took the speech class, I got an A. Like, one of the very few times in my entire life I got an A. And speech was not something really pushed or taught. So Dr. Les Kozlow was my teacher. Dr. Kozlow saw me in the hallway. I was going to my senior year, and he said, John, you should be in the debate team next year. And I said, no, Dr. Kozlow, my schedule's already set. I can't do debate. And so a few days later, I saw him again, and I thought he said the same thing, which was, I thought he said, John, you should be on the debate team, to which I said, again, I can't, Dr. Kozlow, my schedule's already set. And he said to me, no, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, you're on the debate team. And I don't know if this is like legal or whatever, but Dr. Kozlow went to the guidance office, dropped some class, I don't know what it was, and put in debate, and put me on the debate team, okay? That moment completely changed my life, because that is where I all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I'm like, oh, I get this. Now all these kids who took all these classes their whole lives, like math and science, and it was so easy for them, this is what they feel like, because I'm in my turf. This is what I feel good about. Now, remember the beginning of the speech I talked about being that Hall of Fame event? So that was, 24 years after graduate high school. You know who was in the audience? Dr. Kozlow. He drove from West Palm Beach, Florida, all the way up and sat in that audience and watched me give that speech and cried his eyes out. It was awesome. And by the way, when I get a copy of this speech, I'm going to send it to him. He's going to probably give me notes what I need to do better. I keep thinking about my hands. He gets mad at me about my hands. But my point being is, like, when you have anger and when you have fear, they can destroy you, or it can make you really strong. It can help you with wisdom. It can make you very passionate. And now in my life, at 44, almost 45, I give about 30 speeches a year. Anytime I get asked to give a speech, I do it because I feel like it's a way that I can give back and I can help out and return all the different blessings and things I've got in my life. Very, very cool. But if I'd never taken that chance, it's funny enough, if I had good penmanship, I don't think I would be here right now. I don't think I ever would have developed the skill of speaking. And as a side note, what's funny is that public speaking is the #1 fear in America. More than death, more than the dentist, which should be another one, by the way. So the thing about it is, in business, it has been phenomenally successful. Because so many times I got asked to speak because I don't think anyone else would do it. But it was a competitive advantage. And again, true academia didn't teach it. Let me wrap up with this. There I am speaking, like you needed to see that. I wanted to talk real quick as I wrap up about success versus significance. In my life, I've had a fair amount of success. And if you were to ask me what was the key to success for me, it's discipline. It is a discipline, hard work discipline. In my family, it didn't matter if you're sick, didn't matter if it was hot, didn't matter if it was cold, didn't matter if you're tired, you work. You show up and you work. We work in our family, like we work hard, okay? The other side of that is I took lots and lots of calculated risk. And I didn't do dumb risks like parachuting out of a plane. I ain't gonna go out of that plane. I think I'll be on fire, I'm not gonna get out of that plane. But I take all kinds of calculated risks, like giving speeches or going out introducing myself to people, just taking different kinds of calculated. That's been core to me. Success is valuable. Success is good. Earning an income and providing for your family. Those are good things. But success can become an addiction. And success won't heal you. I think you will find very, very successful people who you would think, oh my gosh, they're on the top of the mountain. They must be so happy. But the reality is, folks, a lot of times they are not. I love this analogy. If you were to climb to the top of Mount Everest and you were trying to stay on the top of Mount Everest, you know what would happen? You die. You die. You can't stay on top of the mountain. So when you have success and you think, oh my gosh, I got this big promotion, or I graduated, or I got this big account, or whatever, and you think this is it, this is the pinnacle. Well, you know what? It then goes away. And just like any great addiction, you can keep trying to fill it in. So success will never heal the wounds. It's good, but it's not going to get you there, okay? Not all the way there. And in fact, and Daryl and I have talked about this, we've seen people that were crazy. I mean, we have friends that I've seen, they are more successful than I could ever imagine. And they were very lonely and very sad and never really experienced healing and kind of died unknown. And that's one of the saddest things I've ever seen. So with that, I just want to leave you with this kind of final thing. Is first off is that your challenges and your suffering that you've had and you will have is real. It's real. It's not some, hey, rub dirt on it, buck up. No, sometimes you just need to sit in your sadness. Sometimes you need to cry. That's okay. And if anybody to cry with, call me. We'll cry together. But we just need to, sometimes that's what we need to do. Your suffering is real. Know that like being an NFL football player, you're going to get hurt. So think through now about your medical staff. Who are the people around you can talk to? Some people are not safe. Some people are not healthy. Some people are toxic. And then some people are. We have this debate in our house because one of my daughters and I, we love the musical Into the Woods. The other one doesn't like Into the Woods. But in the musical Into the Woods, there's a great line. It says, nice is different than good, right? And so you might have, I have nice friends. That doesn't mean that you have good friends. Because nice friends, maybe they always tell you everything's good. Good friends maybe tell you sometimes things are bad. And sometimes that's what you need to hear. Sometimes what you need to hear is, hey, you drink too much. You party too much. You're not taking this serious. Hey, your life's kind of a mess, but you're not alone. And I'll do it with you. Okay? And I think choosing to be that friend, I think it's so important sometimes in life to say to somebody, do we want to have a relationship where we're going to get real with each other and that's going to be okay? Right? People are not going to naturally tell you have food in your teeth, or your fly's down, or that you're abusive to your spouse. They're not going to. You guys remember the TV show Friends? The TV show Friends is so funny to me. It's much like being friends on Facebook. I have 5,000 friends on Facebook. Somebody people, oh, we're friends on Facebook. I'm like, well, there's 5. The TV show Friends is the definition of mine what friendship is, because it's about encouragement, right? On the TV show and Friends, they just encourage each other. On Facebook, people kind of encourage each other. That's good. We need that. But we need in life something bigger than that. And I always like to refer to as brothers and sisters. And what I mean by that is we need to have relationships with small groups of people where we practice, this is maybe not the best word, but it's the word I like, and that's exhortation. That we tell each other the truth in love, and we're honest with each other, right? And I had a friend of mine contact me recently, going through a rough time, and one of the first things I said is, man, this is really bad. And that's maybe sounds hurtful that I would say that, but I was just trying to play the card, like, let's not skip past this. This is bad. And we got to put that on the table. Just like if I go out and get hit by a car, you guys can't say, "I'll walk it off, John." You're fine. You're not fine. We're going to go to the hospital. Well, if you find out that your spouse is cheating on you, if you find out that your parent has Alzheimer's, if you whatever, you can't just skip past that. So we have to deal with that. The second thing is I want you to know that your weaknesses can become tools if you choose that. Okay? You can choose to make your weaknesses tools to the point where you're grateful for the weaknesses because what they can teach you. All right? Now, you don't celebrate in all the sadness. You live through the sadness, but you have to understand that you can take those things and it can make you a better person. There was an employee I had that their father was very ill, and I thought the employee was going to die, or the employee's father was going to die. And it was really hurting me. It was bothering me. And I was talking to one of my other employees, and this other employee is 74 years old, and I said to her, and her name's Kay, and I said, "Kay, what do we do if this employee loses their father?" And Kay looked at me and said, "We're going to cry." And she said, "And then we're going to get stronger." And that is truth. That is the human experience. I would tell you that life does not work like traditional academia. There is a wonderful place for straight A students. And I want to have a doctor that if I ever have surgery, I want a straight A student to operate on me, But I want someone with dyslexia holding my hand. Make sense? Like there's a balance, and there's not a higher level of worth, it's different. And so I don't look down on somebody who has a traditional, that's great. But I also, equally apply people that have any different kind of things they're suffering with. And then finally, I would tell you that peace, contentment, joy comes from making peace with yourself and giving back and helping others to find the peace from their past. So if you said to me, "John, I get it, I want to be successful, but I also want to be significant," give me a specific example of what that looks like. It means helping out Beacon College. It means coming back here. It means supporting Beacon. It means directing other students to Beacon. It means highlighting Beacon and telling that story of the value that this education creates and the work it can do in the community. One of the most powerful things, 2 words you can ever say to somebody, you know what they are? Me too. When somebody says to you, "I'm suffering with something," you say, "Me too. I'm suffering that too." You're not alone. We might feel lonely, but we don't have to suffer alone. We do have to suffer, but we don't have to suffer alone. So me too. I do want to mention, so I mentioned this, a lot of the stuff I was quoting is from a guy named Chip Dodd and Jeff Schulte. They've written a lot of books on this subject, so in the not plagiarizing category, I want to make sure I mention that in a lot of their work. And the last thing I want to say to you is that of all the speeches I've given in the last year, I don't know long, this one I've been really looking forward to the most. And you know why? Because this has been healing for me. This is the first time I really had the opportunity to talk through what it was that I was dealing with. And Daryl did an announcement about my speech here, and one of the people that responded to it was my mom. And I mentioned my mom loves Daryl, so that first I love Daryl. But then you know what she said? She said, "John, do you really have dyslexia?" And I knew where this was going because I knew what was my mom feeling when she said that? She was feeling shame. She was feeling guilt. She was feeling like, hey, maybe as a mom, did I make a mistake? And I said, Mom, stop. It's not your fault. Mom, it was a different era. We moved. My dad was a pastor. We went to different churches. We helped people. There was purpose in what we did as growing up. It's okay. It's not your fault. At the same time, I need to say, yes, I do suffer with this. Yes, this is something that was my secret shame for a long time, and now I'm going to be open about it and deal with it. And Mom, we're good. Does that make sense? All right. Did you want me to answer any questions or anything, or do you have any questions? All right. Yes, sir.
I mean, tell us about some of the things that you do in your professional life. I mean, I saw Chelsea's description of it on Facebook.
Sure.
But,
Sure.
I'd like to hear more.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. What my company does is we handle shopping centers that other people own. So you got wealthy companies, wealthy individuals, they own shopping centers. They hire my company to take care of those shopping centers. So anything from the maintenance of the shopping centers to make sure the landscaping's done, to collecting the rent, to billing the tenants, bringing the rent in, to leasing the vacant space, to if they need to knock it down and redevelop it, we've done that, do that, to selling the shopping center. So anything in that scope of services, that's what we do. And we operate in the 6 states in the Southeast, and we're now moving into Virginia. We're mainly known for handling Publix-anchored shopping centers, but we handle regional malls, we handle power centers, anything in that mix of things. And what I love about what I do is I love service. So I love taking care of our clients, and I love interacting with the tenants. And the thing that's cool is like not everybody needs an office building. Not everybody needs like industrial building, but people got to eat, So, and I always think about retail as like the core of community. Sometimes when I give speeches, I spoke at FSU last week and I was talking about retail. People often ask, well, what about the internet, and what is that going to do, and how does that impact retail? And I always tell people is that when I ask students all the time, what if I wanted to live to be 100, and I want to be a healthy, active 100, Florida Hospital or Healthy 100. If I want to be the healthy 100, what does that look like? And students will always say, well, you need to, don't smoke and exercise and eat right, all the things you do. The one they always miss, and I always remind them, is you have to live in community. The big part of the speech was about feelings and living in community. And so to be healthy individuals, we have to live in community. And that's why retail and shopping is always going to be part of that, because it's a part of who we are in our DNA to interact with one another, whether it's in a restaurant or whatever. People like that. They interact in meals and things like that. So anyway, that's a long answer, but that's the core of what I do. Helpful? Yeah, and by the way, like I say, on my website, there's this guide to commercial real estate. It's free, and if you're interested in commercial real estate, you can read that. There's a lot of non-real estate stuff in there. Maybe it's helpful, but I always try to open that door up for people. And then it's funny, Daryl mentioned that in the diversity section. So when you think about, I don't meet racist. I don't meet racist people. People say, oh, there's racist. I honestly don't. I don't know what people are talking about. I have a very diverse family, and my world's diverse. But real estate is an example of institutional racism, meaning its structure was set up so that it was benefit. In the state of Florida until the 1970s, a woman could not buy a piece of property without a man's signature. Think how crazy that is, right? And so it's messed up. So then HBCUs, historically black colleges, there's about 106 in the nation, they were built to deal with issues in the black community. Until we got involved, we couldn't find one that was teaching real estate. So here I have this institutional real estate problem, but it's not being addressed. So that's really been our kind of gift back, is we really believe in education. We really believe in real estate education. Because look, every student that graduates from college, they don't not only need to understand nursing or business management or how to play the trombone or whatever, but they all got to live someplace. So the basics of understanding real estate needs to be understood. And the more, if we think about how do we prevent the next Ferguson, right? Look at Ferguson, how do we keep that from happening? I promise you, part of that conversation has to be about real estate. People understanding about owning their own home. People that own their own homes, they end up having a better relationship with law enforcement, because you learn about, you pay taxes. People own their own businesses, so it's core to that. So that's where I get really excited and passionate, because I have this job and it's cool and I love it, but it also can bleed in this bigger conversation about how we can reshape our nation and deal with issues. And people talk about problems, but things we can specifically do to make it better. It's just very, very cool. Any question? Yes, sir.
You talked about being diagnosed at 43?
42, yes, yeah. Right.
How old are you now?
44, almost 45.
Okay, so this is really recent diagnosis for you.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you've learned from diagnosis to now that you use to accommodate yourself in ways you didn't before?
It's funny you should ask that question. I would say it's all here. It was all up here. And what I mean by that is I feel like I'm at more peace. I feel like I'm calmer, that I've learned to let some things go, and also I've learned accepting who I am. I think that I was probably, in some areas, I was overcompensating and pushing too hard. And like in business, for example, somewhere as my company, I've learned to let go and let other people lead different divisions in my company. And I think that's come from me just feeling like I don't have to run everything. I don't have to know everything, to be on top of everything. So it's really become a better place at peace for myself.
So you found relief in the diagnosis?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so funny. And I found there was a very mild part of like, do I tell people this? Like, are people going to judge me? Are people going to, say something about it? My dad, did you ever see the movie Silver Linings Playbook?
Yes.
Okay, you just saw the movie? If you ever see the movie, they talk about being bipolar. And my dad was bipolar. And one of the saddest things I feel, and the only sad thing really when I think about my dad's passing is, I wish my dad could live long enough that he could have been open about that. But he always felt like he had to hide that because he felt it was going to hurt, his career and things like that. And maybe that was true in his era, right? But I'm so glad we live in a generation now where we can talk about that. Somebody can say, hey, I'm suffering from, there's still stigmas out there, but people can talk about that. And so for me, I felt like, you know what, I'm at this point, I'm just going to talk about it. I don't think anybody's going to have any kind of issue with it, but I kind of don't care. Because at this point, it's like, this is who I am, this is my story, and it's healthy. But as I say this to you, remember I said earlier about having friends and relationships, there are people that will use things against you, right? And there are unhealthy people out there, there's bad people out there. And so I would say in context, my story and my coming public about, my learning disabilities is not applicable to every person, every situation. I don't advocate every person needs to, talk about it as openly as I have been and will. But I do recommend, almost to the point of saying I insist, if you want to be healthy, you got to talk about it to somebody. And you got to kind of start that. I think we all want to be known. I feel like we all want to be known. We want people to know who we are, who we really are, and what we're all about. And that's like this funeral you and I were talking about where the individual was successful, but I really question were they ever known. And that's part of that process of people knowing what you're dealing with. Is that helpful?
Yeah. My follow-up to that would be, in that diagnosis, how has that changed how you observed your children going through education now?
Well, it's a lot better now.
Yeah.
It's a lot better now because the volume of resources are a lot better. But I will tell you this is true for academia, this is true for crime, this is true for healthcare. If you and I were brothers and we had a sister and she was murdered, the thought process of you saying, well, the cops will figure it out. You and I better be on that police department calling and doing our own CSI investigation, right? Like we better be advocates for that situation. If you and I are brothers and our grandfather got cancer, we think, oh, the medical people take care of it. Nuh-uh. We better become experts at whatever cancer they're having and all over and be a part of it. Well, it's the same thing in academia with your kids. Yeah, and listen, and what I'm saying is not trying to be negative on the medical community, the police department, because I love them and I think they would agree with this, but we need to be our own advocates. And so, yeah, and I think that my parents love me and they believe in academia, but I think they trusted the system and didn't have it. It just wasn't like that back then. Whereas now, you have teachers that welcome that in, and you can have those conversations and you can talk those things through, and there's no stigmas and there's no shame and things like that. It's just, we live in a better time. When people talk about, let's make America great again, I don't know what they're talking about. It's great right now, and I'd rather live now than any other time in history, and we all need to keep doing our part to make it better, but I'm very thankful for this time that we can talk about those things.
Yeah, that's incredibly accurate.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to get, however that came across.
You're in a probably good group.
Okay, good, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
How did you start out in the field that you were in, and what made you decide to, start your own company, and how did it build? Like, were there tough times in the beginning? Tell us how.
Sure, that's a good 5-hour question, but no, but I'll give the short version of this.
Okay.
So I'm a preacher's kid, and they've done studies on preacher's kids that preacher's kids in adulthood tend to outperform doctors' kids and lawyers' kids. This is my theory on that. And when you're a preacher's kid, you grow up in a moral household. Typically, that's good. You grow up in an educated household, so you have sort of bigger thinking and processing, and that's good. But you grow up poor, man. And I'm telling you, when I talk growing poor, we drink powdered milk. I can remember being in the backseat of the car and driving and seeing the road because there's so much rust, you could see the road, So when you combine, I think, education, morality, and poverty, and that poverty is probably too strong a word, but you get what I'm saying, that makes for I want to get out of here. I can remember being 10 years old, thinking, I'm going to get out of here. I'm not going to, I don't want to raise my kid. I want to be married and have kids. I don't want to have kids in this environment. So that's very motivating. The second thing I'll tell you is that, I remember watching the TV show Family Ties, Michael J. Fox, and he said, I want to go to college and major in money. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to major in money. And so, but through my academia, I hated the sciences. When you talk about physics and chemistry, things I couldn't see. The only science that kind of made sense to me was biology, because I felt like if I could see it and I could understand it, right? So when I went to college and I was a finance major, and you take classes like portfolio management, you talk about mutual funds and stocks, I had the same problem. Like, I can't see that. Like, what are we doing here? So when I think about real estate, like we're going to buy that piece of property and that space is vacant, we're going to rent that out for this price and get a return, that just made sense to me. So I think I wanted to be in an environment where I could make as much money as I could. I wanted to be in an environment that was tangible. And that was just a process of learning. I job shadowed a ton of people and learned about it. My brother actually founded the company in 1990. And interestingly, he had this career where he had this company, small company, his own thing. I was in corporate America. So we were doing similar jobs, but almost completely different. Where I was working with Fortune 500 companies, he was in local stuff. When Dad died, that kind of reshaped my life, and I quit my job. I was, again, like on top of the mountain. I was like top young executive, all that kind of cool stuff, and I was miserable. I mean, I speak from which I know, right? So I quit my job with absolutely no business plan and just went and saw my brother and said, can I buy half the company? And it was weird writing him a big check, by the way. And then he likes to say that's when I screwed things up. I didn't see this coming. What happened was he has a more of an introverted but behind the scenes operations skill set, and I have more of a marketing, new business development, and things kind of exploded. And we went from 7 employees now to about 70. It's talking about tough times, really tough times. Oh my gosh, hard times. And I've been through all different kind of cycles. It's hard. And like I said, even when I get to the point where it's like, man, I've got money, I got a house, and this kind of stuff, it's still emotionally hard. There's still moments you got to get through that. But that's why you kind of keep building those groups around you. I'll tell you something funny about that too. One of the other things I got taught that I think was wrong is this belief system that you need to have friends that look like you and talk like you and act like you, like the country club mindset. If you need to be in these little demographics. If you looked at the demographics of the people that are in my inner circle, they are wide. Oh my gosh. I've got guys that I get advice from that are 15 years younger than me. I get advice from guys that are 15 years older than me. I get advice from guys who are, we'll call blue collar. And I'm amazed sometimes like at things, the insight they have. And of course I have some friends that are socioeconomically close to mine. But if I try to have just that world, it doesn't work for me. I like having these different, because here's the thing. As you're more successful and you make more money, a lot of people are not your friends. Like they're around if they're getting a paycheck, okay? And so you need to have friends that don't care about that. They are not about that. They're about you and you're about them. And I find that I have a couple friends who, we're different income brackets, but they're very sensitive about me ever paying for stuff. Because they do not want I love that about, they do not want our friendship to be about that. The friends, it's about us caring about each other. And that's really helped me. But all this stuff's been a process. It's been a time. And it's funny, you talk about just reference to politics. I'm the same age basically as Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. And there are days that I don't feel like I'm ready to be president of Crossman Company, much less president of the United States. So I just sort of think about that. It's like, man, I still intimidate sometimes about all that we're trying to do. But it's awesome, and you just got to keep pushing into it. Life, it is ups and downs. There's no way around it. You cannot stay in the happy place all the time, and when things are bad, they won't stay bad all the time, right? It's really about who you surround yourself with and who you're pouring into. And I've got a point now, it's like, it's important as a business owner to increase profits and be more profitable. That's important. It's just run a responsible business. But as a side of me, as far as how I base my own personal health and satisfaction, I really don't care anymore. I had a cool thing happen years ago. I got to spend 24 hours with Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A. And so we're in his house, and so it's a small group of us. We had dinner with him, and then breakfast and lunch the next day. I mean, this guy, out of nothing, billionaire, owned the Batmobile for crying out loud. I mean, and I asked all the questions like, well, how'd you come up with this Chick-fil-A sandwich? And what was it like to become a billionaire? All of those questions went nowhere. I mean, this guy was in his late 80s, and they went nowhere. Here's what he talked about. He talked about the employee that they helped get through college and then stole $30,000. And he would get tears in his eyes about how sad that was. And then he would talk about a kid that they helped through foster care that graduated high school, and they changed their last name to his first name out of respect. That's all he talked about. And that was very telling to me, that this man who had more financial success than I'm ever going to have, and his really whole definition of his life was down to just the people. And the older I get, I have a hard time remembering the deals, but I can remember the feelings, and I can remember the people. And I try to be very, aware of that. Anything else? I don't know how I'm doing on time. Don't let me. Yes, sir.
Do you always take your daughters to your speakings?
Well, do I always take my daughters from speaking? The answer is as much as I can. Work comes easy to me. Work is like, I like work, and so it's easy for me to work probably too much, and I've had to learn balance. I've had to learn to pull back. So last summer, I had 5 business trips, and I took them with me on every one of the trips. And then when I can, I take them to different stuff. And it's awesome, by the way, it's great. So Claire and I went to an event in Isleworth in December, and we saw a Picasso. That was cool. The guy had a Picasso in his house. That was cool. And we met Jeb Bush, and we met Mel Martinez, and we met a bunch of people. And it was funner having her there than being by myself, because they were all way nicer than her, which was cool. And then Abe and I had dinner with the Jewish National Fund at the Dr. Phillips Performing Arts Center. We went to that together, and we had a blast. And she said to me, she goes, "Dad, how long do we have to stay?" And I said, "We will leave when you want to leave." And so when she got to I think we're done, I was like, that's awesome. And we bounced and we got out of there. So today we had a couple things going on, and but I like it, and I like having. And I also like, as a side note, I like having daughters. I could go a whole speech. I love daughters, and I like them seeing business environments. I like them seeing academia. I like them seeing Beacon. I like them seeing All View, and I think that's good. I think that's helpful in their minds to kind of view and whatever they want to be, but help them be exposed to that. Yeah. Listen, if I could take them to work with me every day, I would. But I think the government would frown on that. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you just recently got diagnosed at 42.
Yep.
And now you're 45. So when you were younger, you had this gap right here that you weren't struggling, but you say you surpassed your superiors and everybody else that came into your company. And when you recently got diagnosed at 45, did that, I'm trying to word it, how did that feel knowing that you had that line of pressure, and then you surpassed everybody, and now you're here successful as you are now.
Mm-hmm.
When you got that diagnosis, how did that feel for you, knowing that I conquered everything on my own, and I kept on pushing, I got tutored, I got help, and I didn't know I had this disability till now?
Well, I think how did I feel about it? Let me take you through some feelings. I think there was part of me that had anger, like, what the heck, guys? Like, how did all these teachers? And I had some teachers like Dr. Kozol I mentioned, but I had a lot more I didn't like, didn't respect, still don't. And I had anger from some of them because they didn't see it, and maybe they didn't say point blank, "You're stupid," but they certainly seems like they were trying to send that message. So I have anger. I had remorse and grief and grieving in a sense of like, well, gosh, if I had been diagnosed, could I have gone to grad school? Could I have become? I had a lunch with Belvin Perry, Judge Perry. You guys probably know him from the case. I had lunch with him, and I asked him. I said, "What makes a great attorney? Like all the years, all the respect." You know what he said? He said, "Attorneys that are great at storytelling. Those make the great attorneys." And I thought to myself, I'm good at storytelling. I can do that. But the reality is I could not have. And so there's grieving in that and saying, well, did I miss a career path? But then I think there's a process you move through that, and those are real, and you do those emotions, and then you say, well, I look at my life, I'm thankful for my life. And I do think all those things then shaped me and helped me to where I got to now. And so the end game feeling to me has been relief. And it's helped me to kind of let go and accept myself for who I am. I think that I've gotten more at a peaceful place and a more content place, and it's enabled me to be more relaxed, and I think be in a better place that I can give back and help other people. But it's exactly like you imagine. It was a complete process, but overwhelming, I'd say, positive relief and an understanding. But again, Listen, I'll tell you one last quick story because it's this one. In 1993, I got hired in my first real estate company, and in 1994, they had this huge real estate conference. It's the biggest real estate conference in my industry, and in fact, it's happening again next month. Big, huge deal. They took everybody in my office, all the salespeople, but me. They left me home. Now think about that, like the sort of, again, humiliation, all that kind of stuff. In 1995, they sent all of us, including me. In 1996, they sent just me. Now how did that happen? Well, I'll tell you why it happened. Because in 1995, when they sent everybody, I was the first guy at the booth in that convention in Las Vegas. I did not party. I didn't have a drink. I didn't go to the casino. I would have been kicked out because I looked like I was 15, but I didn't do any of that stuff, man. I worked hard. Who was the second guy to show up every day to work in Las Vegas? The CEO. The CEO, right? So the next year, when they had budget cuts and they were looking at the list of all these people, the CEO said, I don't know who that guy is, but send that guy. 1998, that guy, that CEO, sold his company to another company, bigger company, and 1,500 employees in that merger. And he said to the new CEOs, he goes, if you want to watch anybody to watch that Crossman guy. And I became a senior vice president at 27. Now, so that's crazy. But how did that happen? It happened partly because of my fear, partly because of my anxiety, partly because of my dyslexia, partly because of my insecurity. I showed up first. And because I was the first one in, it changed everything, right? But look, endowing the scholarships of those black colleges, helping out Beacon, all the work I've done with, UNCF, these organizations, I wouldn't be in the chair to help those people if I hadn't had suffered and then survived it. So, some of it stinks, but big picture, I'm pretty thankful. Is that good? All right.
So on behalf of the Alumni Association,
Thank you.
People here, we'd like to thank you for being with us and
pleasure.
sharing your story. I'd like to introduce Dr. George Haggerty.
Oh, hey, Dr.
Crossman.
How you doing?
Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Okay.
Just before I hand you the Beacon Award for Commitment to Higher Education, I just want to say there's a great book. You may have heard me speak about it before if you've been at Beacon. It's called David and Goliath. I don't know if you've read it, by Malcolm Gladwell. And I have to say that he could have written a chapter on you, because the basic premise of this book is, what are the advantages of being disadvantaged? And what are the disadvantages of being advantaged? And I think your life and your ability to pull all of it together, Gladwell could have written one chapter and you would have been the focal point.
Thank you.
And so I want to thank you. I wish I had been here for the whole speech. So thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.